The other group is used for deep-seated pains, the pain which arises from the viscerals, organs. Second difference is these NSAIDs, their main mechanism of action is peripheral. They act peripherally, although there is central mechanism is also there, but the main is peripheral action. Whereas the opioid analgesics, their main mechanism of action is central. Third difference is these type of drugs, they will not have any drug addiction, they will not cause any type of sedation, will not have tolerance. Whereas the opioids, they have abuse potential. NSAIDs, they will not have any drowsiness or sedation, whereas opioids, they are narcotics, so they will cause sedation. Then the other properties which NSAIDs have, like anti-inflammatory property, antipyretic, are not seen with the opioids. Opioids, they are mainly analgesics. So these are the differences. Next slide. So are you clear about this, the nomenclature?
Yes, ma'am.
See, the nomenclature is that they are analgesics. Besides this, they also have other properties. They have differences from the opioid analgesics. Now, there are some common features of this group of drugs. Like all these drugs, they are acidic compounds. All can be given orally and are well absorbed orally.
मूवी लोहारी है जानो तो पैसा लेते हैं मौका पता है कितने टाइम लगेगा जाना
स्टूडेंट की आवाज आ रही है these drugs have high plasma protein binding
और वो कुछ देर में चलेगा
कोई बोल रहा है चलो हाँ please, students please mute yourself so that you can listen my voice. Okay. Now we will study about the mechanism of action of these drugs. There are number of drugs which are included in the NSAIDs, but they have a common mechanism of action, that is they act by inhibiting COX enzymes. You know what is COX? What is the full form of COX?
Cyclooxygenase.
Okay. Yes, it is cyclooxygenase enzyme, and in our body there are two isoforms of COX are there. One is COX-1 and another is COX-2. Okay. So these drugs, what they do is they will inhibit this enzyme. Next slide. Yes. In this picture you are seeing I will be focusing on the mechanism of action of these drugs. This is a picture of a cell in which there is a cell membrane which constitutes of the membrane which has the membrane phospholipid. Cell membrane is made up of membrane phospholipid. First, the phospholipase A2 enzyme acts on this membrane phospholipid and liberates arachidonic acid. These enzymes, they act on this acid, arachidonic acid, and this acid is converted into various prostaglandins. So cyclooxygenase 1 and cyclooxygenase 2, both the isoforms will inhibit the synthesis of prostaglandins. But what is the difference in COX-1 and COX-2 is COX-1 is constitutive, means it is always present in a cell, whereas COX-2 is inducible. Inducible means it is induced at the time of inflammation. So whenever there is an injury, at that site, COX-2 will be induced and it will produce various prostaglandins which will be responsible for the various features of inflammation. So these enzymes, when they are inhibited, these prostaglandins will be inhibited. So what will be the prostaglandins types produced by COX are? They produce prostaglandins I2, thromboxane A2, prostaglandins E2, TGF2 alpha, and prostaglandins D. So these all will be inhibited if COX enzyme is inhibited. So these drugs, NSAIDs, they inhibit these enzymes, and therefore the production of all these prostaglandins will be inhibited. So this is a common mechanism for all NSAIDs. Now the classification. If you have the books, you can open the books. Do you have the books with you? क्या आपने books खोल रखे हैं?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, some of you might have opened. So आप book पे देखेंगे कि इनका एक classification दिया हुआ है. क्लासिफिकेशन हम इनका ऐसे कर सकते हैं, नॉन सिलेक्टिव कॉक्स इनहिबिटर्स एंड सेकेंड इज सिलेक्टिव कॉक्स इनहिबिटर्स. ओके, another way of classifying these drugs is by their chemical structure, but I have mixed the two. मैंने दोनों क्लासिफिकेशन को मिला दिया है इसमें. तो इसमें मैं ये भी बता रही हूँ आपको कि कौन सा ड्रग कौन से कॉक्स को इनहिबिट करता है, साथ में मैं ये भी बता रही हूँ कि उनका केमिकल स्ट्रक्चर क्या है. So basically, we classify them into as non-selective COX inhibitors and selective COX. Non-selective means, what do you understand by non-selective? Anybody? Yes.
Acts on both cyclooxygenase 1 and cyclooxygenase
Exactly.
2 enzyme.
Exactly. So both the enzymes are inhibited by following drugs. First group is carboxylic acids. Carboxylic acid can be salicylic acid and their esters. There can be acetic acid derivatives. So salicylic acid and esters, the important example is acetyl salicylic acid, or it is also called as aspirin. And we will learn aspirin as a prototype. Another example is diflunisal. Then the second carboxylic acid is acetic acid, but acetic acid is further classified according to the structure into as phenylacetic acid derivative. Example is diclofenac. Carbo and heterocyclic acid, acetic acid is examples are indomethacin, ketorolac, sulindac, tolmetin. Next. Okay. Right. तीसरा है प्रोपियोनिक एसिड डेरिवेटिव्स. एग्जांपल्स आर फ्लरबाइप्रोपेन, कीटोप्रोपेन, thiaprofenic acid, ibuprofen and naproxen. Then there are phenamides. Examples are phenoprofen, flufenamic acid, mefenamic acid. Another group of acids are enolic acids. In this we have pyrazolones and oxycams. Pyrazolones are phenylbutazones, oxycams are pyroxene. Third group is para-aminophenol derivative. Most common example is paracetamol. Then we come to the selective COX inhibitors. Selective COX inhibitors, COX-2 inhibitors, that we understand here that the drugs which will inhibit selectively COX-2. But here also we find that the selectivity for COX-2, according to that also we can classify the drugs as, number one, those which are preferentially COX-2. That means they also have some COX-1 inhibition, but major is COX-2 inhibition. So these are preferential selective COX-2 inhibitors. Examples are nimesulide, nebumetone, etodolac, and meloxicam. Then second group is selective COX-2 inhibitors. Means they do not have any COX-1 inhibition. They are purely selective COX-2 inhibitors. Examples are etoricoxib and poricoxib. But here you should also remember that the three drugs from this group, they are banned, they are obsolete, they are not used because of their adverse effect. These are celecoxib, rofecoxib and valdecoxib. These three written in small letters, they are banned drugs, not used. Now the third, yes? Any query? Okay, we are going ahead. Third, C is highly selective. Highly selective means these are the most efficacious for inhibition of COX-2, and the examples are, there is only one example, that is Lumiracox. Okay, so this is about the classification. Main thing you have to remember is that the drugs can be either COX-1 inhibitor, COX-2 inhibitor, or both inhibitors. Preferentially COX-1 inhibitors, there is no separate list that which drugs are preferential. I have not given you, but non-selective list I have given. Next slide. Now we will study the pharmacology of non-selective COX inhibitors, and we will take aspirin as the prototype drug. And you know the structure of aspirin is that it contains COOH group and COCH3 group. So there are so many drugs. We have seen in the list that there are so many drugs in the NSAIDs, but we will not study each drug in detail. Instead of that, we will study the pharmacology of the prototype. Now, the mechanism of action, it is by COX inhibition. Their pharmacological action first is analgesic action. How they produce analgesia. See, whenever there is a tissue damage or some pain is produced, prostaglandins are produced. Prostaglandins, what they do is they sensitize the pain receptors for the pain, and then there occurs the pain. So basic perception of pain to a patient is because of prostaglandins. And these drugs, by inhibiting the prostaglandins, they will relieve the pain. And they are effective for superficial pain, which can be either somatic or integumentary. So the conditions where these are useful are toothache, headache, myalgia, arthritis, neuralgia, dysmenorrhea, or postoperative pain. So this is about analgesic action. Then second important action is antipyretic action. That means these drugs, they are used to relieve the temperature. So normally what happens that whenever there is some infection or some trauma, it leads to production of TNF alpha and interleukin 1. These raises the set point of body temperature, which is there at the hypothalamus. So PGE2 are responsible for this. They will raise the set point of the temperature regulation at the hypothalamus. These drugs, by inhibiting prostaglandins E2, will reset this temperature regulator center at the hypothalamus and will cause fall in temperature. So this is their antipyretic action. Basically, it is mediated through the hypothalamus. Next is their anti-inflammatory action. Anti-inflammation action is less important as compared to the corticosteroid. That's why the name is NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. The inflammation, in fact, is a very complex process, which is caused by either injury or infection or allergy or ischemia. So at the site of inflammation, what happens is COX-2 is more induced and it also produces prostaglandins, which are basically the mediators of inflammation. So these drugs, by inhibiting prostaglandins, will stop the process of inflammation. Now, one thing here is important for you to understand that paracetamol is a weak anti-inflammatory. All the drugs, they are anti-inflammatory, but paracetamol is not having any anti-inflammatory action because it is unable to inhibit COX in presence of high level of peroxidases, which are usually seen at the site of inflammation. So when there is inflammation, there will be more of this peroxidase inhibits the anti-inflammatory action of paracetamol. So they are not anti-inflammatory. Are you listening? Clear?
Yes,
Hello?
ma'am.
Yes. Okay. What I have mentioned just now. Anybody? How they cause anti-inflammatory action? Which drug do not cause anti-inflammatory action?
Ma'am,
Paracetamol.
paracetamol.
Paracetamol. Okay. Paracetamol do not cause the anti-inflammatory. Rest of them will be causing this action. Okay. So next is the respiration effect on their respiration, acid base and electrolyte balance. Actually, this effect is dose dependent. Normally, what happens that when we give these drugs in therapeutic dose, they cause increase in oxygen consumption. So there will be increase in expulsion of carbon dioxide also. More oxygen is taken, more carbon dioxide will be produced and it will be expelled out. So normally there is a balance. Acid-base balance is not disturbed. But when the dose is increased, there will be stimulation of respiratory center. So more oxygen is consumed, therefore more carbon dioxide will be produced. When more carbon dioxide is produced, it will be expelled out from our body. So more expulsion of carbon dioxide results in respiratory alkalosis. But normally this alkalosis is compensated. Our body tries to compensate this by increasing the excretion of bicarbonate. So bicarbonate is excreted. Along with this, sodium and potassium and water is also excreted. So this respiratory alkalosis is compensated. The body pH is normalized. But this compensatory respiratory alkalosis with further high dose results in, when the dose increases, it results in medullary depression. So when there is medullary depression, the PCO2 increases. It results in respiratory acidosis. Respiratory acidosis then leads to metabolic acidosis. And these are not reversible and these are not compensatory because the body bicarbonate is already lost. So body reserve is lost and with the higher dose, these drugs ultimately results in metabolic acidosis. Further, what happens is that besides this metabolic acidosis, adds to this metabolic acidosis is the accumulation of very strong acids. This occurs because of absolute uncoupling of the oxidative phosphorylation. There is decrease in ATP formation, so more acids are formed and are accumulated. Such acids can be lactic acid, pyruvic acid, acetoacetic acid. So in short, what we understand is that these drugs in normal dose do not affect the acid-base balance. With little higher dose, there will be respiratory alkalosis, and with further dose, there will be metabolic acidosis, which is irreversible. The patient will feel loss of vision, hyperpyrexia, vasomotor collapse, renal failure, respiratory failure, dehydration, convulsion, and coma when there is metabolic acidosis. Next action is on gastrointestinal tract. This is a very important action of these NSAIDs because these drugs, they cause mucosal irritation. That leads to erosion of the mucosa, ultimately results in ulceration, and it also bleeds. So you must have heard from your some seniors, or your experience might be there, that NSAIDs are not very safe drugs, though they are widely prescribed. But these type of drugs, they are GIT irritants. So the severe form of reaction which can occur in the GIT is in the form of bleeding and peptic ulcer. Why this is so common with this drug is because it is also linked with the PGIs. So prostaglandins like PGE2 and PGI2, they are normally protective. They protect the gastric mucosa. So when they are there in the cells or in the gastric mucosa, they will protect the gastric mucosa by the action of the acids. But these drugs, they inhibit the prostaglandins, which are the protectives of the mucosa. When they are inhibited, naturally the gastric mucosa is irritated and it ulcerates. Secondly, the aspirin, which is undissociated in the acidic pH, and when it is absorbed, so in the stomach the pH is acidic, aspirin is undissociated, and when it goes inside the mucosa, there it diffuses. But in the mucosa, the pH is alkaline, so this is unabsorbed and trapped. So with the aspirin, it is trapped in the H ions are trapped in the gastric mucosa, therefore they are causing more irritation. So these are the reasons why these drugs are more gastric irritant. One is that they are inhibiting the prostaglandin. Secondly, the aspirin is trapped in the gastric mucosa, so causing more irritation. Next action, which is also very important, is their anti-platelet action. Anti-platelet action, what do you mean by this? Prevention of aggregation of platelets. Okay?
Platelet aggregation.
Yes, it is inhibited. In our body, normally, which prostaglandin is anti-platelet aggregatory? PGI2.
PGI2.
PGI2 is prostacyclin is normally antiplatelet. Now, this aspirin in a small dose is used as antiplatelet drug. What happens is when we give aspirin from the GIT, it will come to through the portal circulation. It will come in the circulation, but in the portal circulation itself, it inhibits the thromboxane A2 in the platelets. So when thromboxane A2 is inhibited, there will not be aggregation of the platelet. So thromboxane A2 is inhibited before the aspirin reaches to the systemic circulation. So in the portal circulation itself, platelets thromboxane is inhibited and is having the antiplatelet action. This action we can see in a smaller doses of aspirin only. And secondly, aspirin inhibits this COX irreversibly. So whenever aspirin is given, the antiplatelet action will be there for 7 days, and it has got a clinical importance. Clinical importance in the sense that when somebody who has to undergo surgery and who is on aspirin, we have to stop the aspirin 7 days before. Because if we will not stop the aspirin, it will have the antiplatelet action, so there will be more bleeding during the surgery. So we have to stop the aspirin 7 days before because the COX will be inhibited irreversibly. Okay. Another reason is why we give aspirin in small dose is because when aspirin reaches in the liver, it is deacetylated and then it reaches to the systemic circulation, where in small dose it cannot inhibit the vascular endothelium, so it cannot inhibit the PGI. So, in other words, in high dose, the advantage of inhibition of PGI2, that is normally an advantage to prevent this, to counteract the thromboxane A2, that is nullified. So, inhibition of thromboxane and no inhibition of the PGI2 results in antiplatelet action, and this occurs with a small dose. Because with high dose, PGI2 will also be inhibited. So, that advantage will not be there. So, is it clear to you that how platelets, antiplatelet action occurs with the aspirin? Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, just explain me. In your words, can you explain? Why in a small dose,
Ma'am, in a small dose, thromboxane A2, which is produced in the platelets,
yes,
is
yes,
inhibited, and the
yes,
prostacyclin, which is produced by the vascular endothelium, which has a negative impact on platelet aggregation, will
yes,
not be affected in smaller doses.
yes,
Whereas in larger doses, it will also get affected, so the
yes,
beneficial effect will get nullified.
yes, exactly. Okay, now we'll go ahead. Uh, Effect on uric acid excretion. This is also very typical with this type of drugs. We'll see that this effect is dose dependent. In low dose, these drugs decreases uric acid excretion. In therapeutic dose, no effect. In high dose, uric acid excretion is increased. That means the uricosuric action is only seen in high dose. So aspirin is avoided in acute attack of gout. Why? Reason is when we give it in therapeutic doses in gout, it will decrease the uric acid excretion. So in gout, already there is hyperuricemia, and aspirin that decreases uric acid excretion. That means it will further aggravate the hyperuricemia. That's why we will avoid aspirin in acute attack of gout. These drugs can be given in gout, but should be given in high dose. But in high dose, they will cause adverse effects also. With chronic use, these drugs can cause adverse effects like chronic nephritis, renal papillary necrosis. No, I have, yes. In high dose, there will be kidney toxicity, chronic nephritis, renal papillary necrosis, sodium and water retention, and analgesic nephropathies. These were the important pharmacological actions. Now we see the pharmacokinetics. Actually, the absorption of these drugs depends upon the size of the particles of the drug. It also depends upon the pH and the solubility of the preparations. Presence of food also affects the absorption. You must have heard about the Disprin. You know what is Disprin? Disprin is a dispersible aspirin. And here, dispersible aspirin, when it is we keep the tablet in a glass of water. It is dispersed, and then when we take it, it is a better absorption. So dispersible drug has got the better absorption. So the absorption depends upon so many factors. One of the factor is the particle size. Secondly, pH of GIT. Acidic drugs are better absorbed in the acidic medium. But these drugs are better absorbed from the intestine because of large surface area. Then presence of food definitely affects the absorption. It will be less, but because these drugs are gastric irritant, we have to give these drugs after meal. Another peculiarity of this group of drugs is that in low dose they follow first order kinetics, but in high dose they follow zero order kinetics. Now, in short, the adverse effects. Most important is pertaining to the gastrointestinal tract. They cause nausea and vomiting, epigastric pain, bleeding, and can cause peptic ulcer. The reason already we have discussed why they cause these GIT adverse effects. Second is the dose-dependent effect of these drugs is called salicylism. Overdose of salicylates results in salicylism, which is characterized by tinnitus, dizziness, vertigo, and mental confusion. Another important adverse effect is Reese syndrome. Reese syndrome is especially seen in infants and children. And if we give those infants which are suffering from viral fever like chickenpox or influenza, and if we give aspirin, this results in Reese syndrome. Actually, it is a serious condition. In this, the children will have liver damage, encephalopathy. It can be very serious. It can be fatal. So, do you understand what is Reese syndrome? Anybody? Hello. What is Reese syndrome? Hello.
Ma'am, it is a hepatic encephalopathy.
Yes.
Aspirin is contraindicated in children with
Hmm.
viral infection like influenza
Hmm.
because due to risk of Reese syndrome.
Okay. So we should avoid aspirin in infants, especially when they are having some viral fever. We should choose some other NSAID, not the aspirin. Then other adverse effect with the NSAIDs can be hypersensitivity reaction, which will be manifested as urticaria, angioedema, rhinitis, anaphylactic shock, or bronchospasm. Next is idiosyncrasy, rarely seen in some individuals. This occurs with a single dose and in the form of severe bleeding. So, with a single dose, there can be severe bleeding in patients. This is a idiosyncratic phenomenon. Lastly, these drugs can cause hepatic and renal damage, or also it is dose dependent. After this adverse reaction, we will also study about the acute intoxication. When the drugs are given in very high dose, normally the dose of aspirin is about 75 to 325 or 350 milligrams. But when we give the dose in the amount of 20 to 30 grams per day, it results in intoxication. Patient will have vomiting, dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, hemorrhage, high fever, delirium, convulsion, coma, and respiratory failure. Can treat this by hospitalization or by giving activated charcoal. Symptomatic treatment for the treatment of hypothermia. We can do the cold sponging. For dehydration, IV fluids. We have to increase the excretion of the drug by alkalinization of urine. Lastly, we can try peritoneal or hemodialysis. Vitamin K supplementation is also required and in some patients blood transfusion. Now, in this whole procedure for the treatment of intoxication, you will find that we have not mentioned any antidote or antagonist. So this is also a difference from the opioid analgesics. In opioid analgesics, if we get any toxicity, we have the opioid antagonist. But in this group of drugs, we don't have any antagonist. We have to symptomatically treat the patients and we have to change the pH of urine. As you already know that when we change the pH, more of the drug will be excreted. For the acidic drugs, we have to use the alkaline, the cleanizer. Now, in general, what are the uses? These are the NSAIDs will be used as analgesics and the conditions where we will use. I have already mentioned that they are used for superficial type of pain like toothache, menorrhagia, and that. Antipyretic for the relief of fever. Anti-inflammatory, they are used in conditions like arthritis, fibromyositis, gout, cervical spondylitis. Gout, aspirin will be less effective because of its uricosuric action. Then antiplatelet action will be used in case of myocardial infarction and stroke. Here, aspirin is the preferred drug. Some other uses of this NSAIDs are for the closure of patent ductus arteriosus. After birth, normally this ductus arteriosus closes after birth, but in some children, if it is patent, and it is patent because of prostaglandin. So, if we give the drugs which inhibit prostaglandins, there will be medical closure of this patent ductus arteriosus. And for this, ibuprofen is the preferred drug to give the children. Instead of doing surgery, we can treat this medically also. So we give the drugs which inhibit the prostaglandin synthesis that helps in closure of patent ductus arteriosus after birth. Another indication is colon cancer in pregnancy-induced hypertension also, because it is said that thromboxane A2 is responsible for that, and we can use this drugs. Flushing and pruritus due to niacin is because of increased production of prostaglandin B2. Topical use is also there, like methyl salicylate. It is used in joint pain. The combination of the salicylic acid and benzoic acid is commonly used for. Some of the important drug interactions are there with the NSAID because these drugs they have high plasma protein binding. So another drugs which displaces them from the plasma protein sites, or they displace other drugs for the plasma protein binding sites, will have the adverse effects. For example, with the oral anticoagulants. When NSAIDs are given with oral anticoagulants, there will be the chances of bleeding because of increased displacement of the warfarin. Similarly, with the sulfonylurea, which is in fact a drug used for treatment of diabetes, if it is displaced from the plasma protein binding site, there will be more of hypoglycemia. These drugs will bind, so other drugs will be displaced, so other drugs' action will be enhanced. In case of methotrexate, also will increase the toxicity. Another type of interaction can be with the probenecid, which they compete with the probenecid and blocks the effect of probenecid. With diuretic also, they reduce the effect of diuretics because in general we will find that these drugs they have sodium and water retention. So this effect is opposite to that of diuretic, so they will reduce the effect of that. Some of the contraindications are also important to know about this group of drugs. The important one is peptic ulcer. Second is bronchial asthma. Aspirin can precipitate the bronchial asthma. There are several mediators of bronchial asthma, and aspirin can precipitate in susceptible individuals. Children with viral fever, we have already seen that Reese syndrome can occur in pregnancy because these drugs can cause early closure of patent ductus arteriosus, so should be avoided, especially in the last trimester. Then patients undergoing surgery because they will be bleeding. These drugs also causes delayed labor, uh, and then contraindicated in any patient who is having hepatic or renal disease. Should also be avoided in case of bleeding disorders. So this is how we have finished the pharmacology of aspirin. We have studied the mechanism of action and pharmacokinetics, uses and indication and contrast. The second important drug in this is the paracetamol. At present times, this is important because COVID infection is there all over the world, and the first drug which is used to treat fever of this patient is paracetamol. Otherwise, also paracetamol is the drug we use for the pyrexia. We have already mentioned that paracetamol has no anti-inflammatory action. Regarding COX inhibition, it has poor selectivity for COX-2 enzyme, although it is a non-selective COX inhibitor. Some studies have also reported that it also inhibits COX-3 enzyme, but there are not much evidences about this. But COX-3, some suggest that it is expressed in the hypothalamus, and paracetamol acts by inhibiting COX-3 and thereby it reduces the temperature. Another difference from NSAIDs, we find that paracetamol is not a gastric irritant. It also do not have a antiplatelet. The important point to know about paracetamol is that when it is given in high dose, that is above 5 grams, above 5 grams, it can cause hepatic toxicity. And the important compound responsible for hepatic toxicity is NAPKI. NAPKI is in fact an acetyl parabenzoquinoline. This drug is produced. Normally, paracetamol is metabolized by the glucuronide conjugation, and in high doses, glucuronide falls short. So this NAPKI is produced in high amount, and this is toxic to the liver cells, and it can cause a severe hepatic injury. And the treatment of poisoning is also important. In such high dose, The first step in the treatment will be gastric lavage, means to remove the drug which is there in the stomach. Gastric lavage, then we can use activated charcoal. The specific drug for the treatment of poisoning is N-acetylcysteine. N-acetylcysteine is the drug which prevents from the formation of naphtha. It is a donor of this acid group. Allyl group is given so that the toxic compound is not formed and it is excreted. So N-acetylcysteine, it is given intravenously. 150 milligram. Initially, we have to start this in the dextrose. Initially, 150 milligram is given for the 15 minutes. Then the dose is reduced to 50 milligram per kg for the next 4 hours. And then the dose can be, if required, it can be given in a 5% dextrose over a period of 16 hours. So overall, we should not increase the dose above 300 milligram per kg. So there is a particular dose pattern of giving this N-acetylcysteine. You can remember this, it is an antidote for the treatment of paracetamol poison. So that the naphtha is excreted. Orally also we can give this acetylcysteine. Dose is 140 kg, for 140 milligram per kg orally. And then we can reduce the dose as 70 milligram per kg. So initially for first 3 days we start with the IV treatment, but later on we can switch to the oral. So glutathione store will be restored with the N-acetylcysteine, which is required actually for the conjugation of paracetamol, and it is excreted. So in the acids we have seen aspirin and then paracetamol. In the paracetamol I have mentioned you the differences from the acids. Now few words about the selective COX-2 inhibitors. There are various selective COX-2 inhibitors, some are preferential and some are selective. Out of the all COX-2 inhibitors, we have mentioned earlier also that valdecoxib and rofecoxib, they are no more used. The reason behind this is that these drugs, they have caused severe cardiovascular adverse effects in the form of coronary artery disease. Thrombotic phenomena increases with these drugs. The reason for this is that we'll mention in the next slide why these COX-2 inhibitors they are more prone for causing thrombotic phenomena. First, we'll see that COX-1 in comparison to COX-1, COX-2 have less GI toxicity because we have seen that COX-2 is an inducible enzyme. It is induced at the site of infection. So the constitutive enzyme COX-1, it is already there in every cell, and the prostaglandins will be produced and they will protect the gastric mucosa. So with the COX-2, because COX-1 is not inhibited, gastric protection is there, which we do not see in case of non-selective. So this is the difference from the non-selective COX-2 inhibitors, that COX-2 inhibitors, they have gastric protection. Secondly, they do not precipitate bronchial asthma also. They do not cause bleeding because they do not have antiplatelet effect. Now, why they cause more of this thromboembolic phenomena is selective inhibition of COX-2 in vascular endothelium reduces prostaglandins I2, and continued production of COX-1 would produce thromboxane A2. So platelet aggregation increases. This may increase the chances of thrombus formation. So to understand in simple words is that when we give COX-2 inhibitors, the COX-1 dependent thromboxane A2 production is uninhibited. Therefore, COX-2 inhibitors resulted in more of vascular thrombus formation. That is why two drugs, that is valdecoxib and rofecoxib, they are banned. This is not seen with all coxib. Some of the coxib, they are still used and they do not have this thrombus formation and they are safe. So, uses of COX-2 inhibitors is in osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis. These are the chronic conditions which requires the painkillers for the longer time. And these drugs, because they are devoid of gastrointestinal side effects, they are bad. So they are chosen. Parecoxib can be given. This is not only one COX inhibitor which can be given by either intramuscular or intravenous. Otherwise, all other COXIBs or COX inhibitors, they are oral. After this, the preferential COX-2 inhibitors, nimesulide is also an important drug. The differences with other NSAID is that this drug has got strong free radical scavenging property. It also inhibits platelet activating factor. It also inhibits TNF alpha release. And it also inhibits the metalloproteinase activity in the cardiac. Like paracetamol, does not cause bronchospasm, but it is not advised in children below 5 years. Nifopam is in fact an atypical non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. Exact mechanism is not known. It has got some different mechanism. Maybe it is not by the COX inhibition, but some other. It is used for short-lasting pain like musculoskeletal pain, dental pain, post-operative pain, cancer pain. Adverse drug reactions can be like atropine, like dry mouth, urinary retention, blood vision. So this is so in this way we have finished overall discussion on the NSAIDs. I just summarized that NSAIDs are the drugs which are different from the other group of analgesics, which are the opioids. They are different from the other group of anti-inflammatory drugs, which are the corticosteroids. Corticosteroids are the stronger anti-inflammatory. These are lesser stronger than the steroids. They are at present most widely prescribed drugs because pain is a common symptom and they are the analgesics. Will be used for superficial pain. Paracetamol is a preferred drug for as antipyretic. Does not have any anti-inflammatory activity. Okay. Now, their actions which are linked with the PG synthesis inhibitions are analgesic, antipyretic, anti-inflammatory, antiplatelet, and closure of non-PG synthesis inhibited actions are gastric mucosal damage, bleeding, delayed labor, asthma, and these are the toxicity in fact because of PG inhibition. There are advantages also of PG inhibition, the properties which I have mentioned in the last slide, but some disadvantages also there because of PG inhibition, like they will cause gastric mucosa, will be bleeding, there will be delayed labor, asthma and anaphylactic reaction can occur because of PG production, sodium and water. So this is a slide in the last, and see there are various indications, but for that particular indication, what drug we should use is also. Are you with me, students? Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
What I am showing here is, in a nutshell, which will be the indication, which drug will be indicated in that particular condition. For example, if we need antiplatelet action, we will be choosing aspirin. For antibiotic action, we will choose paracetamol. In gout for pain relief, we will choose indomethacin. For cervical spondylitis, indomethacin. For closure of patent ducts, indomethacin. Rheumatoid arthritis, we will choose diclofenac, coxib, and naproxen. For post-operative pain, preferred drugs are diclofenac, ketorolac, paracetamol. For backache, diclofenac and ibuprofen. For uricosuric action, sulfenpyrazone. For topical ophthalmic formulation, flurbiprofen. To lower the incidence of colon cancer, nowadays aspirin is used. For dysmenorrhea, we will use diclofenac and methadone. So, these are the doses which you will learn from your books also. You can see in the books. So, if you have any query, you can ask. Anybody? Hello? Anybody? Okay, so now I ask you, Which drug you will prefer as antiplatelet agent?
Aspirin.
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 Which okay, which drug you will use for dysmenorrhea?
Diclofenac.
Mefenamic acid.
Mefenamic acid.
Okay, which drug you will use for cervical spondylitis?
Endomethacin.
Endomethacin.
Endomethacin. Okay. Which drug you will use normally for backache?
Diclofenac.
Diclofenac.
Aspirin you can give, but preferred drug is diclofenac.
Diclofenac.
So we have a long list of drugs, and we also see that which drug is more suitable to that particular condition because of some properties in that drug we prefer. Okay. So if now you have any question, you can ask me. No questions?
No.
So okay, we have finished the class. Goodbye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.